friendly tones. And my other co-chair, Councillor Stephen Wiles from Suffolk. Stephen, good morning.
A very good morning to you and good morning all.
And I remind you that this event is being live streamed and be aware of that. We ask you not to use the chats, although given that I'm chairing so much, I wouldn't be accessing chat anyway. But I do always think if we were in a room together, you wouldn't be having side conversations. However, behind me is the backing to this. You will see the Aurora Borealis filmed by Susanna Howard outside the hotel she was staying in Chelmsford last night. And I wish to say to you that if you have one of these taken by you or your immediate family in the last few days, we will be having a competition with judgment being taken in the 10-minute break by Susanna and Sharon and Will from my office. I have excused myself from the judging panel. So if you would like to send in your photo on chat, there will be chocolates from a suitable range, be it Galaxy, Mars or whatever, for the winner. We say this merely to make sure that you keep your attention, but I know you will not allow the photos to distract from your eager participation in the meeting. The winner will not be announced till the end, and if you've left, you are disqualified. Isn't that good, you say? That good? Susanna said, how on earth are we going to keep them with us for the whole morning? So there we are. Right. So having done all that, are there any declarations of interest specific to this agenda?
I can't see any hands raised, Councillor.
No, thank you. John. Therefore, can we ask you please to give the apologies, Susanna?
Okay, so I'm not going to go through everything in laborious detail, but just to say that Tanvir Alam is attending this morning on behalf of Andrew Kelso. Ed Garrett has sent his apologies, and so Richard Watson will be updating from the NHS Integrated Care Board. And also Alex Baldwin is attending on behalf of Nicola Cottington. And then in terms of new members, we need to welcome Natalie Jode, who's going to be presenting a bit later on from the Norfolk and Suffolk Arts and Culture Board. And also just worth mentioning that we have a couple of members of the committee for whom this will be their last meeting. So for Anastasia Simpson from Tendring District Council, and also Mark Shenton, who is, of course, currently chair of our ICS Chairs Group as well.
Thank you very much. Welcome to those who are new, and best wishes to those who are leaving. We have the minutes of the last meeting, yes?
We do, yeah.
Are there any inaccuracies or points from those minutes that you wish to pick up? Are you content that we take them as agreed?
Will Pope's got his hand up.
Will?
Thank you, John. Susanna, just my affiliation is down. I'm delighted to be affiliated to Essex County Council, of course, but probably we should correct that.
I think there would be a big question whether Essex County Council wish to have affiliation with you.
Well, I'm sure that's true.
And of course, the answer would be acclamation. Yes, indeed. Right, thank you. Any other points of a correction?
Can't see any other hands up.
Now for the minutes are agreed. And actions, Susanna, matters arising.
So I've circulated the updated ICP workbook, but the only matter arising that I have brought out on the agenda is an update on our Expo 2024 event. So this, of course, took place slightly later than usual because of the general election in the summer. So it took place on the 13th of September. And our keynote speaker was, of course, Sir Terry Waite. I've provided links on the agenda to the web pages on our ICS web site for Expo, just to draw your attention to the fact that we've now made available the legacy materials. So if you did miss or you want to watch back again Sir Terry Waite's speech, it is now available on the website, together with photographs and some other materials from the actual event itself, including somebody very clever flew a drone over the event and very kindly sent us a little film that they've made afterwards of it from above. The other thing, which is, of course, legacy from the event, is, of course, our ICS awards. So towards the end of the day, we handed out 70 trophies and certificates across 8 award categories. And we've now made available the photographs and that, but also all of the case studies. There's a detailed report with a little outline of what those awards were for and what those achievements were, the case studies linked to each of them. And they're currently going out on social media as well. So I'd just like to say a big congratulations to everybody. And just to say, I really wouldn't underestimate the achievement of anybody who received a prize in those awards, because the competition was quite hot for that. So thank you.
No, thank you, Susanna. And I think we should record our appreciation to Susanna and all the team who were involved in organising this mega event, the Expo. Susanna knows I always worry about how much work it takes. You can cost it financially, but it is the sheer amount of time that it takes. I think Susanna's view is it is a huge incentive and encourager, a positive influence on her team. But it was a mega event. I have soothed Essex Police over the congestion on the A12 and the noise that created. And I do say to you, I very rarely, at my level of antiquity, get captivated by an address. But Terry Waite, I thought, was absolutely terrific and gave clear guidance that would be of use to anyone in a leadership role. I am circulating the video of his address around colleagues in Essex County Council, and I invite you to, if you were not there, or even if you were, sit down and watch it again and just think about what can you learn from that wise old man. Any further comments on previous matters or the Expo?
I've seen lots of nods on the screen, but no one's hands up.
Okay, nods are always so useful to a blind man, Susanna. What's next?
Okay, so next is the update from Richard Watson.
Yes, I thought so.
Care Board.
So Ed Garrett is away at the ICS conference. The ability of ICS and the NHS to have endless conferences is quite extraordinary. So we are blessed, Richard Watson, to have you with us. You're always joy, and we know that you will give us a very clear and precise, concise update from the ICB.
I'll do my best, John. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not on the conference circuit this week, so you've got myself this week. So I'm just going to give some updates in terms of some of the headlines. Some of this, apologies, those who were at the strategy event last week have heard me talk a little bit about the Lord Darcy report, but I will, just for others' benefit, give you a couple of headlines and then some other bits that's going on at the moment. So as I've said, Lord Darcy has now come out with a report after he was asked by the government to look at effectively the current state of the NHS. If you haven't had a look at it, I do think it's worth a read. The summary of it, effectively the covering letter, will give you the main messages. But just to give you a flavour of that, effectively, he's concluded the NHS is in a critical condition, and he's saying there are 3 major challenges: access, the outcomes that are currently being achieved, and the funding. And there's more detail in the report in terms of the specifics that he set out. The drivers for that, so what's causing that, he sets out it's the most austere period in NHS history for funding both revenue and, importantly, capital. The legacy, probably unsurprisingly to us, of COVID-19. The voice of patients and staff not being loud enough as a vehicle for change. And that management structures and systems are subject to turbulence and confusion. Probably unsurprisingly to many of us, we love a restructure in the NHS, and that's partly what he's commenting on in terms of some of the changes that we've gone through over the last 10 years or so. Having said that, he states that the NHS signs remain strong and its findings don't call into question the fundamental principles of the NHS, including it being free at the point of delivery. But he does acknowledge that this is going to take more than a 5-year term to sort out. So we're in it for the long haul, effectively, is what he's saying. So he wasn't asked specifically to come up with suggestions, but he has given some helpful tips effectively for the government in terms of what he feels the government should be looking into. And the first link to those drivers is re-engaging staff and re-empowering patients, those who've lived experience, really trying to harness the talent and the experience of those groups in terms of coming up with the solutions. change the financial flows to promote and sustain the expansion of GP mental health community services. So effectively that strategic shift, which we're going to be talking about later in the session, improve productivity in hospitals through capital investment, operational management and empowering staff. So more focus on trying to improve productivity in the acute sector. Across systems, shift more towards technology, so embracing digital, clarifying the roles and accountabilities of our regulators in the NHS, so that's particularly NHS England and the Care Quality Commission, and direct efforts that drive national prosperity. So that's that link between the NHS, health and work, which is a significant part of this government's agenda, and indeed was the last government's as well. My own personal view is I think where the ICB is that we welcome the report. I think it's a helpful synopsis of where we currently find ourselves, and also I think has really acknowledged some of the pressures that we're under, but also some of the things, particularly within SNE, I would say, that we've already got underway. So I think it really resonates with a lot of what we're already doing, and that came out strongly at the strategy event that many of us were at last week. So the government is building off the Darzi report. Effectively now we're developing a refreshed 10-year plan for the NHS, which work has now commenced. The team at NHS England, the Department for Health and Social Care, are now working on that, and it's due to be published in spring 2025. So as you can imagine, we're looking to strongly influence that in terms of how that's going to be constructed, and we've already made contact with the team working on it to invite them to talk with us within SNE. So I'm sure the ICP will be keen to avail ourselves of any opportunities that come across through that. Some other bits, headlines, John and colleagues. I'm also pleased, and some of you will have heard this, that through the work Ed's doing at a national level, we've been fortunate that 4 of our primary care networks in our patch are now part of a national pilot, which will see significant investment coming into the patch around primary care network capacity. So effectively, we'll be looking at what does it take to really get on top of demand. What can we do differently, particularly linked into our integrated neighbourhood team or locality model. So just at the start of that, but really exciting development. Really pleased to say that over in Ipswich Hospital, the new urgent and emergency care centre has now opened for business, and that's providing much needed additional capacity to augment the A&E service there and make sure that only those who absolutely need A&E support go through there. And also, and Alex is here, may say later if there's any questions, but the Community Diagnostics Centre at Newmarket is due to open shortly later this year, which will provide under one roof that range of diagnostic tests to support people, very similar to the service we have up and running within Clacton. And final new thing opening on the 11th of November is the Elective Orthopaedic Centre in Colchester, which will provide a state-of-the-art service for planned operations such as hip and knee replacements. So really exciting, massive a bonus, I think, for our local patch in terms of having that open for business shortly. I think it's fair to say that we're under some pressure. I know all partners are in terms of our financial position. We're not unique within the ICB and within our control total, which affects our major NHS providers. We are at the moment behind our plan. So at the moment, we're projecting an overspend against our plan. And their financial challenges are particularly within West Suffolk Foundation Trust, but also within continuing healthcare within the ICB. We do have an additional meeting of the board taking place in early November to look at the mitigation plans that we are working on as we speak to get back into a balanced position by the end of the financial year. But as you can imagine, that's taking up quite a bit of time, rightly, to ensure that we do that. And the final two things, again, many colleagues will be aware that Baroness Lampard has now opened the inquiry into mental health services in Essex. The inquiry is using its first hearings to allow core participants, including ourselves, EPUT, and other mental health partners within the wider Essex geography to give their opening statements, and bereaved family members, importantly, to deliver their impact statements. So we are playing our part as part of that work. And finally, we are working on our commissioning intentions as an organisation, which effectively is an annual process to signal to our partners the areas of focus for the next financial year. There won't be any surprises. It builds on our 5-year joint forward plan and the integrated care strategy that the ICP owns. And these are going to be published towards the end of the month. And I'm happy, John, Will, others, to bring that, if helpful, through to the ICP at a future meeting. But we're working on those as far as we can with partners. And I'll leave it there, John. Happy to take any questions.
Excellent, Richard. Thank you. Both concise and comprehensive. We have time for questions or comments, so I'll ask Susanna to be the hand spotter.
See any hands at the moment, but just take a second. Don't rush at once. It's a lot quieter than when Ed does it, Richard.
I know, I've done it twice now. I've not had any. I was all ready. I can come up with some. I should have given some colleagues some in advance.
That's all right. I mean, you are very good at making it comprehensive and informative. I guess if any of you haven't been to a community diagnostic centre, I visited the one in Clacton, and it just tells you how good a modern digital NHS can be. It reminds us, by having those scales as you enter the door, of what used to happen when we went to the doctor's surgery as children. If you're as old as I am, Susanna, you got weighed. And as Councillor Fleming, who may be on the call, would tell you, you go to the vet and the dog gets weighed. That early understanding. So in Clacton, you can do it. You just enter your name, they weigh you, and by the time you're seeing a doctor, they may be saying to you, have you thought about X or Y? So it's in a world of the need for healthy weight. I think Jyoti is working in Essex to see what we can do to get greater provision of such equipment in GP surgeries. So back to basics. If there are no questions, Richard.
Measles.
Yes, I'm going to come on to Jyoti. Can you give us an update on the measles outbreak, please, Jyoti?
Certainly. The outbreak centres around a school in Clacton where there are a number of cases. I've spoken to Mary Ramsey, who's the national measles lead, and her advice is we should expect more. This is normal. There will be a couple of waves, and each wave will get smaller in number until it fizzles out. There is some evidence of spread into the community in Tendring, and really the only tool we have in our armoury to respond is vaccination. So we will be meeting with colleagues. Actually, we're going to take this Essex-wide because there is some evidence of spread in other parts of Essex as well. So we'll have an Essex-wide response that will focus on driving up vaccination, particularly in those areas with lowest uptake, together with a communications campaign to drive that uptake up. And I think pertinent to this group is being sure that the health service is ready to respond, checking vaccination status of staff, particularly vulnerable pregnant women, and ensuring that your pathways are robust and that you have a stock of immunoglobulin. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. There's no coincidence that the outbreak has occurred in the area of Essex where vaccination rates are lowest. So absolutely, Jyoti, about the role of health partners. I would just say to everybody on the call, you are closer to communities than many of us in places where there are areas. It's too late now for somebody to get vaccinated in Clacton, that school. Protection takes 2 weeks to get in, to have effect. But how much better it would be if we just, where we know there are areas where vaccination rates are low, everything we could do to get vaccination rates up will help people guard against what's a highly infectious and can be dangerous disease. Okay. Thank you, Jyoti.
Hand up from Sharon Alexander.
Sharon?
Thank you, John. A question is about, we of course are very close to communities and we'll do everything we can to get the message out. We've got very close contacts with schools, but I'm assuming you've already put the messages out to schools, but we're also in touch with all our voluntary groups who may not yet be aware. Are there any comms that we can share for you?
We're working those up, Sharon, and thank you for the offer. We'll take that up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Shirley. It would be useful if there is a standard piece of communications people can use in their areas. That will be good. And if we are going Essex wide, Jyoti, it's probably time now for me to do a note to all Essex County Councillors. Okay.
Thank you.
Right. If there are no more questions, we hand over to, if any of you watch The Chase, have you ever noticed the similarity between the style of Susanna and the governess? So I hand you over to the governess of Suffolk and North East ICP, Susanna Howard, for an update on Future Shift.
Okay, thank you very much, John. So I'm just putting up some slides which I have circulated to colleagues in advance of the meeting today. And just to say that this is a little bit of a kind of interim update. And the spoiler here is that the reason this is an interim update is that I'm intending to bring a much, much more detailed document to the committee for consideration the next time we meet, which will be in early December. So, of course, we began a conversation about left shift initially and then moved that on into kind of future shift earlier in the year. And as Richard summarised so well, kind of recent developments, things like the Darcy report, only serve really to underline the kind of why behind kind of, why do we need to make a kind of future shift in terms of health and care in not just in Suffolk and North East Essex, but more widely as well. So over the summer, there were a series of conversations looking at Future Shift from a very broad range of different perspectives. Those included everything from a kind of clinical perspective. We spoke to students, for example, at the University of Essex. We spent time with practicing clinicians, GP, secondary care consultants, allied health professionals, colleagues in public health and communities, colleagues who lead on our workforce agenda as well, and many, many more. And what then came forward from those conversations were a number of kind of principles, really, about how it is that we need to approach a future shift, because I think everyone's agreed about the why, but the million-dollar question is, okay, so how do we do this? So what I'm seeking this morning is some endorsement for 5 principles about how we make a future shift, and those are summarised in this slide deck, and I'm just going to run through them very briskly. So in summary, they are: 1, they're about how we lead and work together. 2, how clear our vision is of what a more viable future looks like. The third one is about how we invest our time and resources. The 4th, about how we innovate. And the 5th, about how we approach transformation. And of course, all of these you'll see are kind of based around this 3 horizons model, which is a way of kind of trying to understand that complexity of change over time. So just running through those, the first one came through very, very strongly at the workshop that we held in Colchester to discuss this. And this was about the need, the really kind of clear point that if we're going to make a future shift, then that's going to need us to take risks. We need to be radical, brave and bold, and operate with candour as well. And those points are very, very pertinent in the kind of broader concept of compassionate leadership that we've been thinking about. So one of the things that we did at the Expo event was that we had a masterclass session featuring a number of people from across the system and a panel of people, including Sir Terry Waite, but also others colleagues as well, who really unpacked that concept of compassionate leadership. And you can see that issue in there. And that's work that we're going to continue to do to really develop that concept of compassionate leadership. The second principle about working towards a more viable future, I think there's a danger of us violently agreeing actually within the Suffolk and North East Essex system about what a more viable future looks like. It's about person-centred, holistic, integrated, can-do, if you like, health and care with prevention and equality at its heart. And that belief that, if we're able to do that, then that's the thing that will really drive that left shift in the health and well-being of people and communities. So, and of course, that the reason that's important is because increasingly we need to be responsive to people who've got multiple health conditions and comorbidities. And also listening into the experiences that people and communities have of trying to navigate the complexity of our health and care system, where people describe feelings as if they're almost caught in a maze in which they're having to bear the responsibility of kind of project managing their own care. So we discussed over the summer some principles for future shift from a number of perspectives, but these were some clinical principles for a future shift, that it needs to be patient-centred, holistic care, proactive, preventative, but very much, if you like, based around a kind of neighbourhood integrated care model, integrated multidisciplinary collaboration, and then bringing in that kind of future looking kind of where we've got opportunities around technology and digital, the concept of always on technology enabled care, flexible and adaptive clinical roles, and that sense of continuous learning, innovation and technology integration as well. And building on that, if you like, what that means is principle number 3 is that we need to make sure that where we invest our very precious time and resources in driving transformation, we're very careful that that is actually pointing towards that genuinely kind of more viable future. And we're not just, if you like, doing things which we call transformation, but they are in fact really just continuing to prop up the current status quo. So no more sticking plasters. And that was a term that we were using in Future Shift really a few months ago, but then came out, I think, when the Darsley report came out from the government. So what that's about is a real paradigm shift in our health and care system. And this slide, which is in the pack you've got, summarises really what that, would look like in terms of, what we're shifting from a current system to a future system. And also it really means that we need to continue on our journey of system integration, because the more traditional organisational structures that we're moving on from are not really flexible enough to really be able to respond to that rapidly changing world. And the other thing which really came through strongly from this conversation about, not continuing to kind of prop up the status quo is that, the truth is increasing complexity does need us to have new approaches, and they need to be systemic. The systemic problems we got need systemic solutions. So, for example, performance measures was something that came up a lot in those conversations, that actually, they might look seductively simple to have one little measure that just measures a little bit of the system. But those things sometimes, if you like, are not really enabling us to really embrace the fuller complexity of the health and care system. Fourth principle was about how we innovate and the need to really put people at the heart of our innovation. So, of course, things like new technology, but also things like new roles do offer us lots of opportunities to innovate. But what we need to learn from the world of innovation is that successful innovation must be based on what we've been calling the jobs to be done. So the concept of jobs to be done comes from right back to this Theodore Levitt from 1962, and we use this analogy of him saying that people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. So we need to really start to think about, if you like, what is it? What are the problems we're trying to solve for people before we sort of start trying to design lots of drills, if you like, for the future in terms of trying to tackle those. And it's equally important thinking about new roles and where we might, be able to use the opportunity to innovate, particularly with lots of the ideas from the voluntary and community sector. And then finally, if you like, the fifth principle is around how we approach transformation as a system and our learning from that. And we've suggested this progression framework for this. So the idea of building the right foundations, then beginning to do things in a smarter way. And I think there's lots of examples of us doing that around the system, but we can go further. We can go beyond that to doing some smarter things and then really rethinking health and care. So really stretching our horizons in terms of what rethinking health and care would look like. And in terms of, if you like, our learning about that process as a system, we have learned very much, if you like, the importance of building the right foundations. If we think about things like, where we've been able to make progress in areas like digital or in finance, or, for example, the one team approach or the voluntary sector resilience charter, all of those things are good examples of the importance of putting in place the right foundations so that, if you like, we can build on those and move forward. That might enable us to start to do things that are sort of smarter, and there's certainly lots of that around the Suffolk and North East Essex system. But the real challenge is how can we really start to do some smarter things? And that's where we start to talk about, well, what are the conditions in which things like pilot programmes can actually flourish? And again, that goes back to pilot programmes and innovations, if you like, require the right foundations. So we had a really good initiative a few years ago to trial the birdsong approach, for example, in, I think it was West Suffolk. But maybe, at that time, we didn't have in place the foundations we have now built around the integrated neighbourhood teams, where that more radical way of working might be possible. So, the argument is that we do need to absolutely keep our eye on what genuinely rethinking health and care might look like, but we're probably not going to do that in one single step. Indeed, we need to think about continuing to consolidate the foundations that we've built and the progress we've already made to doing things smarter, but really start to think about, if you like, the genuine radical rethinking based on evolving our ideas and our learning going forward. So that's it. Oh, sorry. Lastly, I put in there a really good example of that. This is a slide that was shared at the meeting from Kirsten Alderson and colleagues in the voluntary community sector, who set out very well, if you like, that transformation progression for the voluntary community sector. So in summary, 5 principles for enabling future shift. I am seeking endorsement from the committee this morning on those 5 principles, because they're structuring, if you like, our the much fuller document that I'm aiming to bring to the ICP in early December. These would be fundamental to the way that we structure that document, and maybe some other work as well. So I'll end there, John.
Thank you. Very interesting. I have some thoughts, but let me go to others. Do we have some hands raised?
So Mark Jepson.
Mark Jepson, good morning.
Morning, John. Morning, Susanna. Susanna, obviously you would expect me to say, as chair of the PPG network, what consultation will patients have? Because there's some really good stuff there, and I absolutely endorse principles, but just thinking that, how do we take the more elderly population with us who may not be as tech savvy, and also the consultation with patients as to helping to shape what you're looking to do? Thank you.
And Mark, if I may, I think it's very valid, but I'd go beyond patients as there's patients and there's people who are residents who are not yet patients. There are the patients and there are the staff. In my experience, innovation can feel a threat to many. If only labelled as innovation. They can worry about the future of their own jobs. But even when you do innovate and you create new options which are demonstrably superior to that which went before, enabling your staff to have the confidence to take the leap is important. And so they need to own the innovation as well as just receive the innovation. Susanna?
So absolutely, I agree with all of that. And Mark, just a couple of bits. I mean, I've obviously given a very high-level summary there, but a couple of things we could do. I mean, one is that straightforwardly, be very pleased to come talk to your PPG Leads Network about this work, as that's a very simple ask. But one of the things that we've done, for example, is that over the summer, we did a deep dive piece of work, working with colleagues from Imperial College, using the Jobs to be Done framework to explore exactly that issue with 23 families in depth, if you like, living with frailty across Suffolk and North East Essex. And that's given us a very rich, if you like, understanding of, from their perspective, what are the jobs to be done. We're thinking into the future and thinking about, living with a different population profile, many more people who might be living in that situation. We really need to understand that. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to unpack that. And I'm very hopeful, actually, that perhaps our next system learning programme as a system might well look at that group in particular, and start with the why, the jobs to be done, but then start to bring in a few new partners around the table as well. So anything that you could do to help us to bring other stakeholders to the table would be welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark Shenton, Moira McGrath and Peter Smythe.
So let's take these, we'll take them in the order you've told me. So, Mark?
Thank you, John. And thank you, Susanna. I just wanted to make a number of points. One is, how do we ensure that future shift is something which is a willingness to pull the work rather than engendering a resistance to work being pushed? And how do we ensure that it is very focused on our population, not just the secondary to primary care shift, and particularly around that prevention self-care bit, where we have regularly struggled to get that as a major priority. And I just wonder whether there's something that we can support from an innovation perspective in planning, and instead of doing planning in series all at the end of the year, and I'm looking at our ICB colleagues here, could we actually make it an asynchronous planning round so the community starts first with what kind of plans our integrated neighbourhood teams need to put in place with the population that they serve, and then back to Mark C's point, how we can engage with them in doing that so that it becomes a much more population health focused plan. So I'd just offer that as a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to come to Moira and Peter and then come back to you, Suzanne. Otherwise, we just end up, people may be making very similar points. Moira?
Thank you. Really helpful to see the output of the work to date. I'd echo the point about co-production. I think that feels really important. And I suppose more generally, it's kind of how we implement the change as well as the what we're doing. So using sort of how we use kind of evidence-based methodology, more of a kind of test and learn approach, so that that enables, I think that goes in hand with co-production. Because I think the traditional way of piloting stuff where we kind of do something, see what the outcome is 2 years later, life has moved on, given the sort of level of change that's happening in society in the kind of public sector. So so kind of learn as we're doing, engage with people very much bottom up, because the change is going to be as a result of like thousands of interactions that people have, individuals have with people supporting them. So something that feels more kind of evolutionary and developmental, maybe, rather than some of the traditional ways that we've kind of tried and tested things.
Thank you, Maura, and feels very much where you'll be with your next paper. But Peter?
2 points just very briefly. So the first one is the sort of clinician in me wonders whether the stuff that NICE would come out with about evidence-based outcomes and cost effectiveness, whether we should be nodding in that general direction given the sort of stringent times we're in. And then secondly, and it's a broader point really, quite a lot of the concepts that we've just talked about are not new. They've been around for some time. Did we get any sort of sense through the reflections and the information gathering about what has prevented us from getting there in the past, and will that be written up? And does the board have any reflections on that?
Thank you very much, Peter. Indeed, Mark and Peter's pieces chime quite well together. Susanna?
Okay, so I'd agree with all of that. And I did say at the beginning, this is a little bit of a kind of trailer, really, for the much fuller conversation that I think we need to have. And many of the points that you've all made do point to much bigger kind of topics, if you like, that we will unpack in more detail. So one example, just going to Moira's point, is that at the workshop, one of the colleagues that we heard from was Sue Conker, and Sue is our ICS co-production lead. She's recently published in the International Journal of Integrated Care, and she talked about, if you like, not just what, but kind of how around co-production and moving into the space around co-delivery with people and families, and gave us a model about kind of how we can do that. So, for example, that will be set out in some detail in the paper. And exactly Peter's point, I mean, I gave a very high-level overview, but what's prevented us making progress in the past was some of the things that we've pointed to about the fact that we've not necessarily been thorough enough with some of the foundations we need to put in place. So there's a very strong message, if you look at the slide from the voluntary and community sector, that, you know, you keep coming out to us, you keep asking us to be innovative and trial new things and so on, but it fails because you don't have the underpinning sustainable funding and strategy going forward. Or, you know, we've actually tried to, you know, put some things in place without actually supporting staff in the right way to do what they need to do. So I hope all of these things are really good points. The document I'll bring to you will be a draft, but we are looking to get that finalised, because I know, talking to my other colleagues, these things are interconnected. So Richard and I work very, very closely together, and thinking about things like how we approach the joint forward plan. We'd look to inform that using some of these principles going forward.
Okay. Thank you, Susanna. A very full answer. Any other hands raised?
Not see any at the moment, no.
Okay. I'm going to ask, please, would you...
Nikki. Sorry, Nikki.
Can you liaise with Jyoti and Will and the people at my end, I think it would be very useful for that 5 principles to come before the Essex Health and Wellbeing Board as a means of bringing our other ICBs into the loop. I've got time for one more. I've got Nikki. Any other hands apart from that?
Just Nikki. Just Nikki.
Okay. So concise question, concise answer, please.
Yes, thank you, John. Just to say that I do think the principles are very good, and I think it is about building the right foundation. I think it's about having a joined up system, and I think we've also got a lot of experience across our system, certainly in children and families in Essex. I'm sure there are things that we could share, but I think we've also got to know that failure will come, but how do we also keep going and get going to make sure that we get to the delivery and outcomes. I just think we need to hold that in mind as we move forward, because we could spend so much time doing the planning that we don't get to the delivery and the outcomes. Thank you.
Particular attention, Nikki, when all partners in the statutory world, both NHS, local authorities and so on, are really going through a financial needle at the moment. Okay, I think there was a comment, Susanna.
That's fine. I've made a note of that. Thank you, Nikki.
Susanna requests that we endorse these principles as the basis on which the work goes forward. I will assume that we are happy to endorse unless anyone indicates to the contrary.
Yeah. Okay, I can't see anything, but I can only see some people. No hands.
Okay. Well done, Suzanne. It's very interesting. Thank you. And I know that people who were at the workshop found it very interesting. We move on to learning from winter pressures, 2022-23. I find this label quite difficult because we're going into 2025. And I think the key piece is, given what we learned that year, given what we've experienced, how satisfied are we with the progress we are making, and thus how confident are we as we look forward? Are you introducing Susanna, or are we going straight to the speaker?
Elizabeth.
Thank you. Susanna, am I presenting the slides? I'm happy to.
You are, if that's okay.
Yep, that's fine.
Morning,
yep.
Elizabeth.
Thank you. I will take the paper at red, but I will just skim through and absolutely recognise the question that you've asked. So I'm Elizabeth Maloney. I'm the Director of Operations for SNE ICB. Part of my portfolio includes urgent emergency care. So as rightly has been said, back in back in September of 23, there was a system learning event around winter pressures. And the purpose of this paper really is to provide some assurance around the learning that we have had, but also the opportunities that we can continue to pursue, preferably as a broad system, focusing on sort of the real priorities that we have. So the paper really covers off the bits and pieces you can see on the screen. So in terms of UEC services, our ambitions, where we're going. Really importantly, I just wanted to set the context of where we are today and the demand that we are still seeing in our system, and really create that, reinforce that need to really continue to focus on this. And then just a sort of just a few pointers to sort of help the committee's discussion around this item. So just very briefly, the UEC is a term that is bandied around. Urgent emergency care is a term that's bandied around quite a lot, and it means different things to different people. Particularly in the operations world, we can tend to focus on our acute partners, so be that the East or the 111 service that we have through PPG, or generally that kind of thing. It can be quite hospital based. But in doing that, I think we really, really missed the point. So the purpose of this slide really is just to say, do you know what? As was said back in 22-23 in that learning event, urgent emergency care, meeting the needs of people when arguably they're at their most vulnerable, is a whole system response. And it starts right back in the really important work that we do around public health campaigns, taking it through proactive care. So that's the focus that we're really now sort of starting to take. This year, we have taken the Joint Forward Plan. So it's a system strategy that we have, and we've really focused in on the 3 main objectives that we have, that shared ambition, and said, so what are we doing about it? I'm not going to go everything through on this slide, but I hope this starts to answer the question. So have we really understood those needs, and how are we responding? And also some candour and honesty about the variation that we still have in the system, some of that being unwarranted, and what exactly we're trying to do around that. What we've also then said is there are 4 main priorities that we've got this year. So that further integration across primary, community and secondary care, really understanding the role that each other have and how we're supporting each other's focus is something that we're doing. But I still think that there's further work to be done, and that's one of the discussion items on the final slide that we'll come to, if that's okay. Within the scope of sort of my part of the world, the operational element of it, just some assurance that actually there has been learning. So, for example, we are incredibly proud that we have listened to our population, the residents and people that we serve. We understand that dental is a major challenge that we have out there. And with the support of PPG, Belinda's on this particular call, through 111, we are now able to provide urgent dental treatment appointments at when that patient calls into 111. Not every system is able to do that. Not every system's responded. We have also really secured investment in our unscheduled care coordination hub. So when people call 999, they don't often, there are some people that don't know where else to go. So they call 999 or they walk into ED. There's a bit of a, they don't know where else to go. That's the some of the challenges around navigating our system. So the Unscheduled Care Hub, which recently won a Can Do award from the system, actively looks at those calls that are coming through, and where we believe that there is a more appropriate and better solution for those people than an ambulance being deployed, that's what we do. And as a result, particularly in Q2, we have seen a reduction in the number of ambulances being dispatched for those C3 and below calls, and we have seen an increase in our response times through the ambulance service that have been able to go to those patients that genuinely and quite rightly need those support. We have also delivered some new capacity. So we now in Ipswich Hospital have a brand new urgent emergency care centre. It is a combined facility between our ED department and our urgent treatment centre. It's a one-stop shop. And the great thing about it is encouraging people. You have to go through that minor injuries pathway in order to be assessed before you determine if you're going into the emergency department, unless you come in on an ambulance. So again, what I'm trying to say is we are avoiding those admissions going into the emergency department unless we really need to. And there's also some very progressive work that's happening in North East Essex at the moment around respiratory hubs, for example, and trying to get that proactive care in, as well as a brand new full service going into Suffolk, which will mean for the first time across the system, we do have a pickup full service for people that require it. But there is further work to be done. So today's context is, whilst we did end the Q2, so the end of September, in an improved position, October has proved to be very challenging for us. We have seen a reduction in many of the national standards that we have to meet. So that is about ambulance handover times. That has been challenging. And we're also continuing to see some quite challenged performance at our ED departments as well. But we know one of the things that came out of the learning event is we need to be making more use of our population health management data. And here's some of the headlines that have come out of that as a result of the work that we've done with the ICS's intelligence function. I'm not going to go through it now because I'm really conscious of time that we've got available, but I appreciate that colleagues have seen it. The two headlines I would just like to focus on here is, and this is a bit where I think there is still more that we can do as a system, is that 9% of the emergency admissions that we see coming through our emergency department relate to long-term and chronic conditions that could be better managed in our community. We also know that we're not brilliant in some of our settings, particularly in acute settings, about recognising end of life and being able to report that effectively. So the 1 in 10 emergency admissions that are coming in as end of life, we think is an underestimation. So there are just 2 examples of the opportunities that we've still got there. And we do continue to see, both within emergency departments and in wards where we offer inpatient provision, some quite long and complex mental health requirements, which again, an acute hospital setting is not the best place often for those people in that state of vulnerability. We have also recognised through our PHM that there are some common characteristics with this. So again, there's a real opportunity to sort of focus in. I won't go through these because, again, conscious of time, but here are some, just a little reminder of the things that came out of the previous two learning events that we had. And just to conclude, there is something here about making sure that we do continue to support our staff. That, you know, the particular focus around urgent emergency care it is daily and it is pressured. And it's about creating the kind of environment, I think, for people to be able to feel resilient in this space as well. Probably the one that I will just focus on rather than going through everything here is that point that Susanna's already made following on from the last presentation around future shift. We have a real opportunity as a system with this year's business planning cycle to really focus on the jobs that need to be done around some of our key priorities. Take frailty and understanding across those 6 live well domains that we have, what exactly are we each going to be doing around that and making sure that we're really sort of pulling together and where it's appropriate, offering this support to people in the community so that our urgent emergency services are genuinely there for people that need them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Well done, lot to get through, I know, but I'm grateful. Time for 1 or 2 questions or comments. I was very interested, you know, what you said at the start, Elizabeth, about so often being focused on acute hospitals. And I sometimes think that the title can take you. So when I hear urgent emergency care, my immediate reaction is acute hospitals. A bit like if I read about Kellogg's cornflakes, I think breakfast cereal best had at breakfast. Other brands are available. So I just, you know, what you're actually talking about is care, not crisis, it seems to me. How one ensures that the care is proactively given to avoid the crisis coming. And I just, sometimes having a title that reflects what the real nub of the issue is about. And as you quite correctly said, it ties up with future shift. So are there any...
Four hands up. So Mark Shenton, Lauren Siemens, Stuart Keeble and Peter Smythe.
So I'm going to bring the two who've spoken before in last, because that's just nice, isn't it? So Lauren, Stuart, Peter, Mark. And if you can keep your points concise, please, I'll be grateful.
Thank you. I'm aware that I'm actually speaking next, so I will be very brief, but I just wanted to reflect on what Elizabeth has just shown us, as well as some of Susanna's presentation on future shift, in that although it was correct for 23-24, campaigns like Think Pharmacy First were very much prevention. And over the last 12 months, they have very much shifted into the primary and community triage. But what I wanted to comment on was actually about harnessing some of the national commissioning that is at no cost to the local system to make sure that we are capturing the value for local residents and patients. So with all the pressures on workforce and budgets and trying to thread that needle in the Treasury, it's actually sort of remapping some of the national changes and the things that are paid for within those contracting processes, and actually looking at how we can better integrate them into the local system so that patients and residents are aware of all the options that are available with them. Because although innovation is fantastic and we need innovators to lead the way in new service delivery and new models of care, it's also making sure we don't lose the great value opportunities that are nationally commissioned as well.
Lauren, I always like the thought of making sure we take full advantage of other funds. Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. So I think the thing for me is, and we're now seeing this more holistically, that this isn't just a thing for winter. This is about how we support people in the communities to stay well. And I just wanted to give one example. And I think the point you made, Liz, about the percentage of people with long-term conditions and struggling to manage them. So we've commissioned some insight work working with Healthwatch around respiratory, and hopefully that will be coming out soon. And one of the insights somebody gave back to me was about why people with chronic with COPD don't go for pulmonary rehab. And it was interesting, the conversation that came up is that actually we know quite a few people smoke out of that cohort, and they didn't want to go to pulmonary rehab because they didn't want to be judged for the fact that they still smoked. So actually some of the solutions to this are probably relatively simple, and some of it's about actually again going back to Susanna's point earlier about how we work with our staff and the way that we do things. And actually if we can pick these insights out, so obviously we're looking at this now as part of the preparation for winter, but again, it's this continuous conversation, learning and development. And I think we'll find some of those insights are very simple. And actually, if we can work them out, we might be able to get more support out to people in the resources we already have.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. I'll take Peter, Mark, Belinda, and then I'll come back to Elizabeth to respond. Peter?
Yeah, 2 points. I was going to speak in support of Lauren's point around pharmacy first. I do think that's a resource that we haven't fully utilised yet as a system, and there's some bits locally that we could do to get that done. My bigger point, Liz, is that we hear from people like the Commonwealth Fund that England has one of the lowest proportion of hospital beds in the world, and there's always an error margin with these sorts of things. So how close are we getting to where we should be given those two things, really?
Thank you, Peter. That's a great question. Mark, then Belinda.
So I had a point about personalisation of care plans so that we stop doing unwarranted and unwanted things to this significant cohort of people who are going into hospital who don't actually want to be there. And how can we support communities and our population to do that in a way that can then help clinicians to stop acting in overly paternalistic ways, which often results in admission that isn't in patients' or their carers' best interest.
Yeah, I've got one more hand after Belinda, which is Tende. I'm going to have to stop then, but it's terrific. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I'm giving you a lot to answer to at once, but Belinda?
Thank you. I just wanted to come back to Liz's point about dental. I think we cannot underestimate the massive difference the access to these dental appointments has done to our community. It is absolutely fantastic. Some of you may remember me talking at the Uncomfortable Truths event at the Rugby Club at Colchester when I sat on a panel and gave examples of patients ringing us in 111 and the clinical assessment service. They were threatening self-harm and sometimes suicide because they could not access urgent and emergency dental appointments. It was terrible for our patients. We are now the first system that I know of that is getting access to urgent and emergency appointments for those dental patients because of the opening up of access to appointments in DPAS and the University of Suffolk. So I just wanted to share that the difference between that Uncomfortable Truths event and now, in our most recent month, I was able to share with the ICB compliments no less, from dental patients ringing the 111 service, and we were able to access those appointments. It is a most extraordinary change and really should be celebrated, and is a brilliant example of partnership work across a number of organisations. So yes, thank you for letting me share that. It looks like a comment on a slide, but actually the difference to our patients is absolutely extraordinary, and other systems are saying, how on earth have you done that? Please tell us, we want to know. Thank you.
You make me want to open the champagne, Belinda.
I tell you what, it feels like that on this one because the difference is so stark.
Our Director of Public Health would tell me off for alcohol use, but there we go. Finally, Tanvir, very last, and then back to you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you. I echo the sentiments of my colleagues. Just wanted to mention something. We seem to have a yearly focus on respiratory illnesses and frailty as the sort of main areas where our vulnerable populations end up in hospital settings. But I'm sorry to say it is a nationwide malady that this sort of work starts pretty late in the year, and actually the work should already start in the summertime if you want to get ready for winter, and that needs to be an aspiration for the system. Even as part of the antimicrobial stewardship group, which I'm chairing, we don't even have the ability to initiate serious shortage protocols for antibiotics earlier, which invariably will happen somewhere in the middle of December, or there might be another strep A outbreak or whatever. But we seem to be not really learning from the events of the previous year, because all the respiratory programs initiatives are kicking off now, and they will probably go live somewhere mid-November, when already we have missed a significant cohort of this population that we can make a tangible change for. So I think as a system, if you really want to do future shift and learn from this particular situation, the work must start in April or May, not in September, when it is already fairly late in the year to make any dent for this vulnerable group. This is just my observation. It's been every year it has been the same story. And I feel that there needs to be the push from the wider system to start this work much earlier to actually produce some change, because we have lost 20% of our hospital beds. Yes, we are the lowest per capita, per bed, per 1,000 population beds in Europe right now. And that's because that happened about 25, 30 years ago, where you had 1,000 bedded hospitals, 200 were taken off. And therefore, there was no capacity for a buffer for any overflow. And many hospitals have now critical incidents because of that. Thank you.
I think the message I hear, Tanvir, as a layman, is that this has to be ongoing. So while we call it winter pressures, as Elizabeth said right at the start, it's actually all-year pressures. I think in 2023, the biggest single day for hospital admissions across Essex, or the weekend, was a very hot and humid weekend with respiratory issues coming in. So that just reminds us. Elizabeth, there's been a lot of comments there. Rather than go back to everyone individually, could you pick out 2 or 3 key points, please, in your response?
Absolutely. So I think my 2 points really would be we do have a single forward plan for UEC, which directly relates back to the commitments that we as a system have made through the joint forward plan. We actively monitor that on a quarterly basis. So Tanvir's very helpful challenge about let's not plan in winter. I'm only here in October because that was the time, but please be assured that this is something that we are constantly reviewing, and there is constant assurance and looking for improvement around. I think there are things that we are doing which are in the system which we just don't know about. So we don't necessarily communicate the services that we're commissioning, and that's one of the things that we're really focusing on. We have actually got quite a good relationship just sort of kicking off between Ipswich Hospital, the new UECC, and community pharmacy, looking at a redirection policy to maximise that. But I think my overwhelming point is we've actually got a real opportunity in this quarter through the business planning process across the different organisations and across the different live well domains to say, actually, let's make sure our investment is creating flow. And I don't mean that in a hospital flow sense. I mean that we're doing that at the earliest point of intervention. We're recognising some of the challenges that Tanvir's helpfully sort of laid down for us all, and that we are not creating those bottlenecks. So that genuinely joined up focus around frailty, for example, and what each of those elements can do, and communicating that between us, giving us that assurance that work is happening, and being honest about when it's not happening and the blockers would be incredibly helpful.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and you sparked a great discussion, please. I always take the view that these meetings should be about discussion, not just listening to presentations. So I'm very grateful to you for creating such good discussion. It is 10:30. I know I've got other hands up, but I think we do need to move on. Governors. Sorry?
Hazel Roberts, CQC.
Right, so I've been told by the governor, so I need to allow Hazel from the CQC to speak. So she knows how to keep ourselves on the right side of the law. Hazel, good morning.
Morning. Sorry to come in at this point. I appreciate you want to move on. But I just wanted to say from a CQC perspective, we are looking at systems pressures rather than just winter pressures. And we're making a plan at the moment about how we look at systems as a whole rather than just going out and doing assessments of emergency departments in winter, which is what we've done historically. So what we're looking at doing is we're looking at whole systems, providing assessment reports on particular services and locations that are regulated that we inspect, but also doing a letter to systems to say where their wider pressures are. So hopefully that will be something that will be really useful throughout the year to support this work. So Elizabeth, I will key in with you about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. If you ever knew the works of Alexander Pope, observe how system into system runs, how other planets follow other suns. And I hear that, Hazel. I just observe. I hear system and I hear NHS. And I look forward to the day when we recognise the totality of the system. And we'll come back to that later on when we come to the Caring Communities Commission. So after that little nice piece of literature from Maitreya, literary history, we move on. Lauren, you've taken us into Pharmacy First already, so welcome. And this is such an important and exciting element. So over to you. I will need to keep you to time, please.
Yep, thank you very much. And I acknowledge that I have already had some airtime this morning, so I will try and speed through my presentation and keep it to the point. I just wanted to start by introducing myself. I'm one of the Joint Chief Officers of Community Pharmacy Norfolk and Suffolk. So we merged back in April of this year. So we represent the community pharmacies in Norfolk and Suffolk, but not the North East Essex section, although we liaise very closely with Essex as well. Pharmacists have been advising, supporting, treating their communities for what we call minor illness for many, many years. We call it minor, but it's quite significant to the people that come in and ask for help. But the reason why we call it minor is they are conditions that are very specific, they're self-limiting, and they can be treated with the right help and support in the patient's own home. They're conditions that don't need onward referral to GP practice or urgent care or secondary care. So what I wanted to introduce to you today was Pharmacy First. I'm going to make an assumption that everybody in the room is quite familiar with a local community pharmacy in their area. We know that community pharmacy is one of the most accessible healthcare providers in the community. And we like to think of ourselves as being at the heart of many communities because you can walk in without need of an appointment or a phone call or booking online. Although we are trying to get with the times and some do offer things like appointment booking for specific services, we are still very much a walk-in service rather than a referral or booking service. So there's some very brief background around Pharmacy First. I've already covered that we've been treating minor illness in the community for many, many years. And pharmacies really stepped up during COVID in that they were one of the only healthcare providers that provide walk-in care without appointment face-to-face. So we are very proud of what our pharmacies did during pandemic conditions. Following that, we put forward our national bodies put forward proposals for a service that meant that not only could we give people advice, but actually that we can provide some appropriate treatments to patients so that they don't need to go to a GP and get a prescription and then come back and get it dispensed. We already know for certain conditions what patients are likely to come back with. So some of these, the 7 conditions I'm going to outline quickly, are things that pharmacies have been wanting to help treatment of for many, many years. And we were very pleased that in the Recovering Access Plan for primary care that there was a commitment to commission Pharmacy First as a service to patients. And the service started on the 31st of January 2024. So we just missed the winter of last year, but it is an all year round service. These are conditions that people develop throughout the year, although some are more seasonal than others. There are some animations available to very quickly, in a minute, describe how the service runs. Susanna was trying to download an animation, and I don't know whether we, with technical issues, managed to get there or not, Susanna.
We can't do it right in the middle of this, so let's see if we've got time in just a second.
Okay. Absolutely fine. But the slide pack has come out. The link should be clickable. So there are different versions of the animation suitable for, it says GP, but really it's people with an existing knowledge of healthcare systems. There's a patient animation, and then there's one that describes the value of the Pharmacy First service so far from the early figures that we've got. So what do I actually mean when I say Pharmacy First? I think Pharmacy First was a campaign last year. But now it is Pharmacy First is a service. And what it does is it incorporates what used to be a referral service where pharmacists could be referred patients for minor illness consultations and where they could supply urgent medicines. For example, somebody runs out of their inhalers over the weekend or they're on holiday and they've forgotten their medicines. It's quite obvious that a pharmacy with access to appropriate care records should be able to make supplies for people that have run out of their medicines rather than having to pitch up at urgent care services when there's somebody that could do that for them in the community. The additional element are what we call the clinical pathways consultations. So subject to some criteria and age limits, the public can turn up at a pharmacy and get treatment if it's appropriate and safe to do so for sinusitis, sore throat, earache, insect bites, impetigo, shingles, and urinary tract infections. So these are all conditions that pharmacists are very experienced in seeing over the years, and they now have what we call patient group directions in place, which is a legal document, a set of instructions that says, if the patient meets these criteria, we can also give treatment, which may be a nasal spray or an antibiotic where appropriate. And we are very proud that our pharmacists are very experienced in delivering these sorts of directives, and they have very comprehensive safeguards in place for things like antibiotic stewardship and making sure that only the right people get the right treatments, so that we're not handing out prescription medicines like sweets, as some of the newspapers reported back in January when it was about to launch. We are proud that the evidence so far shows that we've got very stringent protocols in place to make sure that the right patients get the right treatments. So the successes so far, over 97% of pharmacies have signed up to deliver this service in SNE. That is a huge endorsement that this service is something that pharmacies want to offer to their patients. We know from some of the surveys conducted in other parts of the country that 9 out of 10 patients would use the service again. So they were able to access appropriate care, and they were happy with the care that they received in 9 out of 10 cases. And also, early data tells us that only 2% of patients actually require onward referral at the time of the consultation. Obviously, part of the consultation is that if somebody's symptoms progress, if they get a reoccurrent issue, then obviously they will need to go on and see their GP or the appropriate service. But for every 100 patients that access a consultation, only 2% of them actually needing at the time to be referred to another service. Really speaks volumes that we are reaching the right people and we are being referred the right patients as well. We are watching very closely some of this data. But we are very pleased so far that we have the confidence backed up by the figures that are coming through. The challenges we've had so far are around IT systems. We launched the service with the minimum viable IT platform, as the national team called it, in that not all the systems were quite ready at the time that we launched, but we had our consultation systems in place, and we had pathways to make sure that the patient records went to the GPs so that they can be part of the patient record. And that is really important because we know we want patients and the public to only have to tell their story once where possible. We don't want people to have to keep explaining to different professionals where they've been and why. So if somebody did have a urinary tract infection and they got treatment in a pharmacy, if they then go to their GP 3-4 months later and they have another one, they should be able to see from the record that they've already had a urinary tract infection and what the treatment was, so that they can take that into account when deciding on the next course of action, and the same for the other conditions. So we do have the IT systems in place for the minimum safety requirements and making sure that we have proper notes, etc. But we would like to see progress on reducing the workload of our colleagues in the other areas of the healthcare arena, so that they don't have to manually input things. The other challenge we've got is referral pathways. Although patients can walk in, if somebody has called their GP practice or come to a treatment centre and they've been recommended to come to a pharmacy, we want to make sure that they have a proper handover, that we've got the background knowledge. And again, so the patient doesn't have to repeat everything they've already told their first point of contact. We want the right care in the right place at the right time. And if that is coming to a pharmacy, we want the patient to be supported in that handover, and also to make sure that we don't lose them in the process. Because if they go to a treatment centre or they call a GP practice and they get told go to a pharmacy, they may or may not turn up. Whereas if we get a proper referral in place, we can follow up with that patient and call them and ask, is this still an issue? Do you still need help? Public awareness.
Lauren, it's fascinating. I really am interested, but you're not going to leave any time for questions or comments. So could you just move on with a bit of pace?
Yep. No, that's fine. I will segue into the next slide instead. The thing that I really wanted to focus on here is things around the public awareness. I know that when I go onto social media, into the news, I see all the pharmacy articles because I am looking for them. So I think to myself, how can everybody not know about this service? I see it everywhere, but it's natural. You see the things that you are involved in. So we really do need to do some work around public awareness and making sure that people know what they can get from their community pharmacies. So next steps really is around that raising awareness for patients and the public, doing everything we can to make sure that people know where to go for the right conditions and they have the confidence in pharmacists as healthcare professionals. We need to look at increasing our referral rates and making sure that they are appropriate systems. We also want to see the conditions that we can treat widened, but that is a national lobbying exercise. And we want to make sure that the service is properly integrated. So it is not just a standalone service. It is something recognised by the other providers, about the voluntary sector as well, about employers, and making sure that we're hitting all the opportunities to support people without them having to wait for a condition to worsen before they get treatment. And then the final thing on here is about work with the ICP members to identify opportunities. So I welcome anybody who would like to discuss with us how we access pharmacy first and who it may be suitable for. We're happy to go into a lot more detail with you and set up some of those meetings. But then the final thing is, I didn't want to ignore the fact that pharmacies are doing lots of other services as well. At the moment, they're doing their flu vaccination clinics. There are pharmacies doing COVID vaccinations. The SNE system has an early adopter of the RSV vaccination as well. And the other more year-round services we've got are pharmacists can provide contraception and they can take people's blood pressures and appropriately assess them before referring on to GPs if necessary. So there are lots of things that pharmacists can do to help support their communities. What we're here to do is to talk about how we maximise those opportunities, because a lot of our commissioning is national, so it's not always fostered as well as some of the local services that are commissioned. So I'm on to questions now. I'll open up the floor. Did anybody?
Yeah. We've only got a minute or two, so we'll leave you in your own time to have a look at the film. It's only a couple of minutes, but it's very worthwhile. The animation, which is the link to it is in your papers. I will take, how many hands are up?
Two, Mark Jepson and Belinda White.
So Mark and Belinda, are there going to be any more?
And then Amy Longfoot.
So we've not heard from Amy, so I'll take Amy, then Mark Jepson, then Belinda. And then I'm really going to have to draw halt, I'm afraid. Amy?
Hi there, thank you. I just thought it was worth mentioning that the Federation have a project funded by the ICB to support Pharmacy First, bringing practices and pharmacies together to try and overcome some of these teething issues or some of the challenges that Lauren has described, and to build the really important local relationships between primary care partners. It will involve some clinical training from a GP that both pharmacists and GPs have flagged as something they would feel would bring better outcomes from the Pharmacy First service and to improve the patient experience, and it will also bring the services together so they can understand the pressures that each other might be experiencing and hopefully develop some mutually beneficial local pathways. So I just thought it was helpful to add that in.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, Mark Jepson.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're probably talking to the converted in this forum. So from a patient's perspective, I wonder if there's something, Susanna, we can do through the network meeting, and also to perhaps put some of the information here on the SNE platform, which promotes that and also promotes what you're trying to do. That was really its observations rather than the question, John.
Thank you, Mark. Belinda?
Mine's a really quick offer of help to increase those referrals from 111. Please, let's have a conversation about that, Lauren. Thank you. That's it.
Lauren has offered you individual meetings. Will, in my office, I think I'd like to get a if I can have this, Lauren, please, a shortened version of this key points that we can circulate to all our county councillors to help in the public awareness campaign. My question would be is how you maximise the participation rates among pharmacists, because if we're going to really get lots of referrals, people need to be confident that they will get the service when they go to the pharmacist. So over to you, Lauren.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because shortening the presentation, I obviously didn't manage to go into some of the figures, but we know that 97% of pharmacies are signed up to this service. The data that we get that's 3 months out of date already shows that over 90% of those pharmacies are actively delivering the service. And I'm also pleased to confirm that we have some funding as well from the ICB to help support the awareness and implementation. So not only will we be looking at referrals and public awareness, but we'll also be looking at supporting the pharmacies to make sure that they are confidently and consistently offering the service to the public, because we certainly don't want to raise awareness and have anybody have a negative experience when they enter a pharmacy. We want to make sure that both ends of the spectrum match up.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Lauren. And thank you all very much for your engagement. The contributions once heard round the table today remind us that we do indeed have an aurora borealis of human talent, a wonderful display of all that you have to offer. So I would remind you, as we move into the break, this is your last chance to send in your photos to the governess and her team. It is now exactly what time?
It is 10:52. Michelle's just putting up on the screen some of the photos that we've got so far, which we'll be scrutinising over the break. So if there's any late arrivals, just please send them in. But those are the ones that we've got there on the screen.
And we will resume at 11:03. Thank you. Right. Right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Good part two, everybody. 11:03, and we go straight in now to 4 items. We'll take them, and I promise you it will be 12 o'clock on the dot that we announce the winner of the Aurora Borealis photo competition. We're joined now by Jyoti, the Director of Public Health for Essex. Jyoti's been with us on an interim basis, and I'd wish to say to you publicly, Jyoti, thank you for the terrific job that you've done. This will be your last meeting here before our new DPH arrives. Jyoti.
Thank you very much. Nathan's going to kick this item off and I'll support with questions.
Okay, so make sure we keep presentation down to minimum for discussion time. There's huge amounts of paper here, Nathan, so you give us the highlights.
Certainly, thank you, John. I will be as concise as possible. So you've had quite a lot in the paper. We will take the bulk of it as read. But just to sort of as a quick reminder, this is focusing on the Essex Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy, which was last agreed by the Essex Health and Wellbeing Board back in 2022 and runs through to 26. It's got 5 priorities around improving mental health and well-being, physical activity and healthy weight, supporting long-term independence, alcohol and substance misuse, and health inequalities and the wider determinants of health. The board requested that a midpoint review was done to look at what's happened during years 1 and 2, agree any sort of key areas for focus for the next 2 years of the strategy, and to think about and what has been the impact of the strategy so far and any changes we've seen in sort of health outcomes affecting our communities. This was brought to the Health and Wellbeing Board back in September, and we'll just do a quick summary now. So, apologies, my slides are sticking.
So just as a quick highlight, as part of the work we did, we convened a workshop of partners from across the whole of the Essex County Council footprint, and from a range of different partner organisations, including people on this call and organisations on this call. Part of the key highlights that we found from the data report was that there's actually been quite a significant improvement across most areas of the ECC footprint in healthy life expectancy. However, there have been a number of areas that have seen a decrease in healthy life expectancy, and as expected, those are those areas who are fairly deprived and rank fairly low on the indices of multiple deprivation. For example, there is now a sort of 23.5-year gap between a child being born in Brentwood and a child being born in central Clacton. We're also seeing increasing numbers post-pandemic of children and young people presenting with social, emotional and mental health needs in a range of settings across the area, as well as impacts continuing to affect adults with mental health and long-term mental illness conditions. This is increasing in Essex and significantly worse than the national average. As we've noted as a priority, there is an issue around healthy weight and obesity. And again, this is increasing across all age groups. We also know that healthy diet is continuing to decline. Physical activity recommendations, at least 1 in 5 adults are inactive, and we know that in part as well there is a link to decrease in levels of active travel. But there's also been challenges linked to the cost of living crisis that residents have been impacting, that increasing numbers of households are struggling, with 1 in 10 pushed below the poverty line due to issues such as heating costs, and 1/5 of all school children in Essex are now eligible for free school meals. We also know that while smoking rates are decreasing overall, this is continuing to increase within particular cohorts, such as adults who work in particular sort of manual professions. And we're also aware of the challenge of children taking up vaping. So what's been happening over years 1 and 2? Sorry, my laptop keeps freezing on the side, so apologies here. What's been happening on years 1 and 2? So I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to say these are all in the pack. A lot of focus on years 1 and 2 has been around developing new strategies and approaches to implementing work programs against all of the priorities. In particular on mental health, there's been some new partnership groups which have been established across the county, such as the Mental Health Implementation Group and the Southend Essex and Thurrock Suicide Prevention Board. And looking forward, we know there's going to be a lot of work focusing on an all-age mental health strategy in the south of the county, as well as a focus on children and young people's mental health going forward. On physical activity and healthy weight, we've been developing the new healthy weight strategy, which has come separately to the Health and Wellbeing Board, and a lot of focus on the local delivery pilot that's been led by Active Essex across the whole of the county area, including things like the pedal power scheme, which has had both impacts on people's physical activity, but also opened up access to things like employment and access to training opportunities. Going forward, work on this will continue, we expect, across all of the work we've previously mentioned, and we'll be moving into the implementation phase of the healthy weight strategy, something which will be coming back to the board in future meetings. On long-term independence, we've seen a range of things happening across the county. There's been talk about mobile diagnostic centres, which will allow people to access more support directly within their communities, and particularly targeting underrepresented groups. We've also seen a range of additional activities from other partners such as the fire service, who have been doing increasing numbers of home safety visits to try and help vulnerable residents stay in their own homes. And we'll be seeing future work happening around falls care and prevention services in Herts and West. On alcohol and substance misuse, there's been work going on to build the Essex Recovery Foundation, which will deliver services across the county, and building in user voice. We've talked previously in this meeting about making sure that we are hearing and learning from service users and patients about what is working and what isn't. And going forward, there's going to be some new tendering happening with the Essex Southend and Thurrock Drug Partnership.
Please.
Yep. And then finally, just on health inequalities, we've identified a range of activities that were happening across the system targeting specific groups. However, I think one of the key findings from this work was that we did not necessarily have a lot of focus on specific health inequalities as such. It was all very sort of tangentially linked. So the process itself highlighted a number of challenges for us. We reached out to a number of partners over several months, but it was very difficult to collate the activity. And it really showed to us that the joint health and wellbeing strategy isn't really as fully embedded with partners as a system strategy in the way that we would like. We also felt that most partners, unless they were health-based, did not feel it was necessarily linked to them, seeing the strategy more as purely health-related for health partners. And then finally, we recognise that the sort of approach to the strategy delivery so far, which has been fairly hands-off, needs a more rigorous approach to coordination and monitoring going forward, and that will be set out as the approach in the paper around delivering, setting up senior responsible officers and officer lead champions, and identifying a lead multi-entity agency forum who will take forward action planning for years 2, 3 and 4 around each of the priorities and themes. Those will then be responsible for feeding back to the Health and Wellbeing Board going forward what they're doing and what the sort of ambitions, actions they're doing, and how they're going to be measuring outcome going forward.
Thank you, Nathan. Sorry, you're out of time. Jyoti, very quickly.
I think there's been a lot of really good work from partners, and I think there's even more we could do with concerted efforts. So next steps are to identify system leaders for each of the priorities, supported by professional leads, and either an existing multi-agency forum or to develop one where there isn't one, to take forward active and coordinated strategy delivery planning.
Yes, absolutely. The idea is great. We now need to implement it, and I'm very grateful to members of the SNE system who have already offered to take on sponsoring and SRO roles. You will see the value of all this work. I'm sure we don't need to educate you on that. Questions or comments, please?
No hands up at the moment.
So I would invite all on the call, please, to consider whether you or somebody you know would be best placed to help fill this driving force on this work at the county level. And so much innovation to be proud of, actually. I would just want to note things like the Recovery Foundation, an independent charity created on the basis that it could have greater freedom to work. And this isn't just co-produced, this is now entirely produced by those very brave people who are in recovery for every day of their lives. So much to commend. Thank you very much, Nathan. Thank you, Jyoti. And we come now to Richard Pulliston. So another item based in Essex, but relevant to the SNE system, the Essex Care and Communities Commission. Richard, please make sure we leave time for discussion.
Yeah, no, I can whip through the slides pretty quickly. Can I just start by saying thank you to the colleagues from SNE. They've been absolutely brilliant in terms of opening up avenues within this system to engagement, which is absolutely crucial to the Commission's work. So thank you very much. It's been really, really super helpful, and there's been lots of enthusiasm. Just in terms of the sort of why we set the commission up, so there are sort of four key reasons for that, none of which will be unfamiliar to colleagues on this call. So firstly, the pressure on public services, unprecedented and unsustainable. We see that in the County Council on our adults and children's services, so double the request for support in adult social care over the last decade or so. We've seen 117% increase in requests for assessments for education and health plans. And if it's not sort of volume, there's also cost pressures on our services, particularly in the children's social care market. And obviously the Darcy report was published on the 12th of September, which demonstrated the pressure on health services as well. Michelle, can you just push the slide forward one, please? And again. Sorry, thank you. So there's all of that happening in terms of what's going on at the moment. Secondly, the long-range pressures impacting these services are pulling in a consistent and challenging direction. So on the same day that the Darcy report was published, the OBR also published its fiscal forward look that said that on current policy settings, so if nothing changes, public spending would have to rise from 45% to 60% of GDP to address the challenges that exist in the system. Thirdly, I think we have to take the view that this isn't somebody else's problem. Obviously, additional money would be helpful, and no one is suggesting that that wouldn't be the case, but it's also our challenge. It feels right that people in the system who are already focused on these issues should be responding to the challenges that we face. 10 years ago, as John will know, because he was the vice chairman of the commission, we set up the Who Will Care Commission, and it feels right to have another look at some of the challenges that still exist. And finally, I think we need to be optimistic that we can affect change. We have new technologies. We've seen the value of those in the sort of rollout of care tech and adult social care, but we also have these new system level partnerships which support our ability to work across the system more effectively. So we're optimistic that we can do something meaningful in terms of addressing these challenges. Just in terms of fleshing out the demand picture a bit more, I mean, this is sort of fairly obvious stuff, but firstly, the population is growing, which creates demand, but as it grows, it's also aging. The population growth of our over 65s is 10 times faster than the growth of our working age population. As the population grows and ages, we're also seeing increase in people living with disabilities and one or more health conditions, which means that healthy life expectancy has actually fallen back by a year over the last decade. And if you can go on to the next slide, please, Michelle, just to say that on top of this, Greater Essex has also seen increases in deprivation over the course of the last decade or so. So according to the indices of multiple deprivation, we now have 188,000 people living in Greater Essex in the most deprived 20% of places in the country. In 2007, that was 106,000 people. So obviously there is a sort of challenge for us there. And if you go on to the next slide, I won't dwell on this, but the Commission's focus is very much on community capacity. And we have some brilliant communities across the county. But we also know that there is an asymmetric correlation between demand and community capacity, which basically means that where the need is greatest, the community capacity is quite often weakest. If you go on to the next slide, Michelle. So just to come on to the mandate of the Commission, the Commission's mandate is to be transformative. We wouldn't have gone through the process of establishing a Commission to make incremental changes. We want the Commission, or the Commission will be focused on communities in its first year. So there are lots of avenues and ways into addressing these challenges, but the Commission's focus is very much on communities. It wants to come up with actionable recommendations, which can be implemented locally, but that might also influence thinking nationally. And I think it's important to say that the Commission is independent of the County Council, and it may direct its recommendations to any part of the system. Michelle, the next slide. I won't dwell on this one, but this is just a list of commissioners. If you can flick it forwards. Some of whom will be known to colleagues. I won't go down the list, but Pam Donnelly, who's the Chief Exec of Colchester, will be known, I think, to everyone on this call. But we have a mixture of commissioners with local and national expertise. And then just on the next slide, In terms of the way in which the Commission intends to work, it's focused on sort of 4 key areas. How do we promote healthy communities? How do we have connected communities? How do we foster inclusive communities? And how do we empower our communities? And final couple of slides, and then I'll stop. If you go on to the next one, just in terms of how it intends to work. So there are sort of 4 levels of activity. So at the top level, we are having a set of national hearings. We've got one coming up on the 16th of October and then the next on the 21st of November, where we'll be inviting experts from outside of the system to help us think about our challenges and bring their perspectives to bear. Then there's a whole bunch of activity that we are doing with system partners. So Susanna was very kind to invite us to come along to the Future Shift conference recently, and off the back of that, we've got lots of engagement going on with colleagues across the system. Thirdly, we want to do direct engagement with people, so one-to-ones would be really helpful. And then we're very, very keen to hear the views of residents. So that's basically where we are. The Commission's only been set up for just under a month, but is doing a huge amount of work. In terms of what we want from you...
Richard, I'm sorry. I need to stop you, Richard. We've got no time for discussion otherwise. Have you got one final sentence?
Well, can I just say, in terms of what we want from this conversation, we're very keen for this system to engage with the work of the Commission. Invite us into meetings, send us your thoughts or examples of good practice that we can amplify, share your knowledge and experience, and help us to meet residents and service users. That's really what we're very keen to do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I know you had a lot to say, but we just need to... I need to leave space for questions or comments.
I've got a comment, John.
Right, Susanna. The challenge for me now is the meeting will shut up and not ask Richard anything. But yes, Susanna.
So, Richard, thank you for that. And indeed, the synergy with the Future Shift work is quite striking, isn't it? So it's really quite encouraging that we're doing both these things together at the moment. Just one direct offer, which is that I mentioned earlier on today that we'd done some engagement around families living with frailty, around the concept of jobs to be done. And there's a specific report about that, which we're going to share very soon indeed. So I just would like to offer that to you because I think that would offer some of that perspective, not all, but some of it from people and communities.
Thank you. I will observe that the voluntary community sector in SNE is particularly well developed. So really, those of you on the call, I would think you have much to offer into the Commission is here. Lauren, from what you said about Pharmacy First, there's stuff in from you. So we just you've got the address to go to offer yourselves and your evidence. We will benefit from hearing as many as possible.
Got a hand up from Sharon.
And we have a hand up from Sharon. I'm just checking. Sharon, any other hands?
Just Sharon at the moment.
Okay. All offers, please go direct into Richard and the team. But Sharon?
Yes, thanks, John. Just wanted to confirm that we are working with Richard. He's coming to Tendering Together, which is salient given Harwich, Clacton and Walton are amongst the most deprived in Richard's report. So we're expecting a lot of engagement from our voluntary sector where they'll be participating in a workshop led by Richard.
Excellent. Thank you, Sharon. Anybody else?
No other hands at the moment.
Richard, thank you very much. I'm seeing you later, I think. So it's terrific work and I commend it to all of you. We now come to an update on the Anchors network, Anchors activity. Now, I can't quite remember who's presenting. Rachel's presenting. There's, again, lots of material, Rachel. If you can pick out the key points, there really is important that we let people contribute. So, Rachel.
Thank you. And yes, we'll take the report as read and just talk through 3 of the key slides. So I'm joined by Liesl as well. So the report gives fuller detail around the Anchors Programme Board and the members and all of those things, but we'll leave it to colleagues to sort of go back and read that if you haven't had a chance yet. And I'll pass on to Liesl to start, where we'll talk through our dashboards.
So what we've got there that's showing you is the current version of our Anchors reporting. It's designed to cover both assurance purposes and sharing of learning. So if you've only got 1 minute to look at something, it's got a brief overview that gives some headline information, just to give a flavour of what's happening in anchors as an overview. Then there are some focus pages that give some qualitative and quantitative measures. And that's just on sort of 1 or 2 anchors pillars at a time. So if you've got 5 minutes, there's a bit more depth there.
Health, yeah.
Then you've got, in addition to that, a far more detailed impact report that gives much more information about some of the specific work that's going on the pillar that's focused on through the more focused pages. And that includes case studies, and it's an opportunity really to share the learning and the good practice that's going on. So I think really just to say that it's an iterative process. These dashboards continue to develop. We use them in different ways, as I'd said, but at the moment they only include NHS partners data. So what we're aiming to do over time is to incorporate wider system partners within that, but they're likely to use different measures. So it will continue to develop onwards, and I think that's pretty well sums it up in a nutshell. Is there anything you want to add, Rachel?
Liesl, I'll just go over onto the last slide, which shows how we brought together all the information from the first set of dashboards, which was specifically on workforce. So with our providers and the ICB completing it, we had 80 examples of activity and 12 case studies. So then what we did is we reached out to the people committee to kind of find out, well, what more could we do to kind of add value to it in terms of sharing that learning. So in addition to the case studies and information from our providers in the ICB, you'll see there's also information from the Job Centre, the universities, the colleges, the Integrated Care Academy, Dental CIC, Essex Cares, Essex County Council, Health and Care Academies. And throughout the impact report, it picks up around apprenticeships, engaging school children and students, inclusive employment, staff networks, inclusion programmes and staff wellbeing. It's been really well received when we presented it at different committees, and particularly workforce colleagues have enjoyed being able to access and look at the information and have encouraged us to share it more widely. By the time we reach the end of the financial year, we'll have 2 further reports. Over the summer, the dashboards were completed on estates and sustainability, so we will take that to the ICB Estates Board to get some feedback, and then there'll be a final one on communities and procurement at the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you both very much, Rachel and Liesl. So we can have a few minutes of discussion here. We do have an Essex Anchors Board. The opportunities here, you know, for really affecting change are great. I think we're as yet tinkering with this in Essex, but I look at the Inclusive Employment Programme, where last year we saw 35 people with learning disabilities engaged in Mid and South Essex ICB, of which I think 21 went on to get full-time jobs, which is terrific. The work going on around how we solve together our aspects of the accommodation crisis, where temporary accommodation needs are far beyond the ability of any partner to cope with. But these are just scratching the surface of the opportunities. We're going to be taking forward a fostering friendly employer scheme, which I know Will Pope has said we can bring to Mid and South, to SNE, which is great. So it's these big things that can go alongside the cornucopia of stuff that Rachel and Liesl have described going underway already. So thank you. Comments or questions?
So 2 hands up, Chris Bally and Moira McGraw.
So I'll take Chris, then Moira.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the report. It's really interesting, actually. So I'm conscious that probably councils have a number of sort of like social value sort of like projects and initiatives underway. This is just a question. It's my first meeting here, so I'm the chief executive of East Suffolk. But could you point me to the dashboards, just so are they publicly available, so that we could access them and maybe look at how we could feed some of our data in?
Thanks, Chris. So I think that's direct to Rachel and Liesl. I'll leave them to come back. But Myra, you may be able to help Chris as well. You've got a question, but you may be able to answer Chris from the Essex viewpoint.
Sorry, couldn't get off mute. Actually, I was going to make the point on social value. I think we've been on a real journey in Essex, and particularly in adult social care, where we've really challenged ourselves on how we can use social value as part of our procurement, including how we kind of measure and monitor the impacts of that. And we've got quite a lot of, I think, helpful learning, which I'm happy to sort of play into a future conversation if that's helpful. And the other bit is, I think, probably is where we're kind of a bit underpowered is thinking about some of our wider social care providers who are often the major employers in some in some areas, about how we can start to bring them into some of the conversations around anchor institutions, as we're hopefully consolidating some of the market going forward as well. So just something to think about for the future, but certainly in terms of social value, taking Chris's point, I think there's been a lot of work in local government on that, but some of the testing we've done in adult social care, I think, provides some helpful kind of indicators of how it might operate in the NHS and wider partners.
The challenge is to maintain the integrity of it, Chris. It can become something that ends up in a paper. There's a paragraph saying social value will be generated by X. The assurance that it is real social value and being properly measured is where the test comes in. Otherwise, it can become one of these standard paragraphs, as too often and sadly things like equality assessments and so on are. These things can become. You just got to maintain the integrity of them. Any other comments or questions?
Okay, to come back on a couple of those, if that's okay. It's Rachel. So just to say. Yeah, thank you. So just to say, absolutely, would really be keen to follow up, Moira, around social value. Within this report, there was a slide showing how linking up with our procurement leads is the next sort of focus, as it were. So really keen to follow up on that. And Chris, yes, we'd happily share the dashboards. Liesl is the person to speak to on that. And we have shared them already with Herts and West Essex system, for example. And she'll be able to talk you through about, the measures we use for health might not quite be what you'd want to use, but there's some really good sort of, it's a good way to start. So Liesl's your woman for that.
Yeah, happy to have a discussion outside of this meeting, Chris.
Thank you. I've got time if there's any other question or comment.
No further hands up, Chair.
Yeah, well done. And thank you for absolutely doing what I asked, which is freed up time for discussion. So thank you. There is much in that paper that I commend to you if you've not had a chance to read it in detail. And as I say, it's a huge opportunity. Thank you, Rachel and Liesl. We come now to Natalie, and that area so often neglected about the impact of the creative arts on health and vice versa. So, Natalie, you're most welcome. And if I can get you to start off and kick off a good discussion for us, Natalie.
Will do. Thank you ever so much for having me today. I am Natalie Jode. I'm here to represent the Norfolk and Suffolk Culture Board, for which I am the executive lead for Creative Health, and I'm doing a double act with Rachel Jennings, so this perfectly segues. And we're here really to represent the Thinking Differently Together Creative Health event, which took place in June of this year, and for which I was presenting, but which I'm also reliably told was the largest attended Thinking Differently Together event, with over 100 representatives on that call. It was a really punchy and dynamic meeting, as Creative Health always is, I should say. So it's a big agenda and a developing one, and I'm here to represent a paper that Rachel has already submitted and that we will take as read. And I'm just going to talk quickly about the key themes and actions that came out of that many of which, in fact, all of which speak to the topics being discussed here today in terms of early intervention, waiting well in acute care, living well with long-term health conditions, frailty, young people's mental health, indeed general mental health, lung health, obesity, and also what's important is staff well-being in terms of our health and social care workforce. So the key themes and recommendations that came out of that conversation, which was long and varied, was collaboration. So having a closer network or networked relationship between our health and social care sector and the creative health sector. And we are beginning that with my presentation here today and a seat, we hope, on this ICP going forward, and a reciprocal seat on the Norfolk and Suffolk Culture Board with Susanna acting as our advisor going forward. So that's a incredible recommendation that we have already actioned. The next one was about sustainable funding, and there has been some discussion today about, what has tripped us up so far in really making these changes in the past, and sustainable funding is one of them. I mean, it's an issue for the voluntary sector, full stop, but in creative health, we are so on the edges of the health and social care voluntary sector relationship that very often it's that sustainable long-term funding that trips us up, because it's arts funders that look after creative health traditionally, and arts funders are not long-term funders. They like short-term interventions and move on to the next great idea. The third recommendation was about impact. The creative health sector is incredibly well versed in evidencing our impact from a number of different ways. But we are constantly asked to repeat that process. And we want to have a more sort of closer conversation with the health and social care sector about what is the evidence that you really need. Do we already have it, and how can we repurpose it? And how can we then move to a conversation about really co-designing models for monitoring and evaluation which are fit for future purpose? The fourth was about the SNE ICS VCFSE assembly, and ensuring that there's greater representation on that assembly by culture sector representatives. We are really a cluster of very small organisations and sometimes individuals, which makes it difficult for us to all be at the same table all of the time. And we, as a Norfolk and Suffolk Culture Board, are trying to think strategically about how we can best represent our creative health sector, whilst not also having to have all of the people at all of the meetings all of the time. The fifth and final recommendation and action was about tackling inequalities, and that's about being clear about what the health and social care needs are in tackling inequalities in the general population, but also about recognising that often the health and social care service can harness existing creative activities which are speaking to people who are often unheard in the sector, who I think somebody early on said, we are trying to talk to people who are not already patients as well as those who are. And the creative sector is incredible at finding those people before they indeed become patients, but also then commissioning bespoke creative and cultural work that can speak to the people who don't present themselves as already part of the system, or who need something additional to attend to their needs. So that is a sort of really brief overview of that paper. I hope that colleagues on the call will take time to really delve into that. And as the executive lead for creative health for the Culture Board, I'm really happy to take conversations outside of this meeting with colleagues or with your networks of partners, and absolutely here to help you sort of realise your future shift ambitions, because it's a powerful notion and one we want to get behind for you. Rachel, is there anything else I should be saying at this juncture?
No, I think you've done brilliantly. I guess the only thing to add is, which you have sort of briefly covered anyway, how a lot of this work really aligns to the work we're doing with our VCFSE Assembly and our Resilience Charter. And we recognised in that report that many of the challenges affecting arts and culture affect our wider voluntary sector. So it's really about how we link those together. And again, I know those conversations are already happening. It was only a couple of weeks ago you met with Kirsten Alderson, and we're seeing how we invite people into the Assembly. So yeah, we're very proactively moving forward on the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Great. Super. Thank you. Hands up. We have chance for discussion here.
So Judy Newman.
I don't think anybody will doubt the merits of what's being described here. Sorry, what name?
Judy.
Judy?
Hello, thank you very much. Natalie, hi, I'm Judy Newman. I'm from St Elizabeth Hospice, but here representing all of the hospices in SNE. And just to really celebrate the report, it was a fantastic summary. And just to really highlight, part of the future shift in the dying well space, of course, is our move towards compassionate communities as a movement of building cultural confidence. And Colchester now has got the Compassionate City accreditation, and we're aiming for that in Suffolk as well. And a key plank is the arts. So the arts is an absolute important element of starting conversations that don't need to be medical. So demedicalising anything that doesn't need to be medical. And the Britain Peers Arts have adopted compassionate communities as their theme for 2024, and there's a creative health residency just started. I went to the workshop last week, so there's some really fantastic work being going on in the die well space. So if there isn't full visibility of that, I would love to share it.
Yes, please. I mean, it would be incredible to be able to propel that forward, and thank you for your support and your backing. Anything that we can do as a cultural sector, you know, to make those noises louder is really what's important. And I know that the Arts Council and other arts funders really see this region as a key player and a leader in embracing culture and creativity as part of health and social care provision going forward. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Do we have any more hands?
No more hands, Chair.
Natalie, don't take the lack of hands here as anything other than commitment and interest. It's not disinterest. It's I think we all get it, actually.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Natalie. Thanks, Rachel. I have no notice of any other business.
No, there's no questions that have been posted online, because obviously we've been live streaming during the meeting. I do have just a reminder before we go to close, the important competition announcement that the date of the next meeting will be Friday, the 13th of December. Of course, the tradition in Suffolk and North East Essex now for many years has been that that meeting is always on the same day as Christmas Jumper Day. So when I do write out with papers for that meeting, I will send a reminder that it will be Christmas Jumper Day as well. So Friday the 13th of December. And just one little housekeeping note, I will be refreshing the invitations to your diaries over the next couple of weeks and so. So just if you suddenly end up with some movement from that, it's because I've changed my email address, and I'm also just having a bit of a tidy up of the committee membership as well. So just look out for those. I'll be deleting the old invitations and sending out new ones.
Thank you very much. So we come to the competition. I think we have 3 slides to show. Firstly, the entrance. I think 8 of you sent us photos. So well done, you. And there they are. And the runner-up, highly commended. I'm good. I'll screw up the surname if I don't say it. Amanda
Takarabasha.
Amanda, well done. Yours will be a giant Mars bar, I believe. So it's all spirit of generosity here, you know, which Susanna and team will get to you. So very well done. And I will say seriously, in the interval, there was quite a discussion went on between yours and the eventual winner. But because of the unique nature of it with the shimmering reflection, Alex Baldwin, congratulations. You are our winner today. Can we show the photo?
Yeah, we're showing it now.
There we are.
Thank you very much, everyone.
So, but it's lovely to know that you were up all night capturing that, and you're still able to make it today, Alex. So, my thanks to my co-chairs, Will and Stephen, who have been much more quiet than I would have been in the other way round, and to all of you for your participation. Have a great day, and when you get there, have a restful and fruitful weekend. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank
you.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Just follow this.
he's going to send it on to everybody. Yeah.